Volition has been bringing us Saints Row titles for over a decade. What started as something that was essentially a Grand Theft Auto clone transitioned into something really special that stood on its own as the developers started incorporating an over-the-top story that took a low-level street gang all the way to the White House, all the while expanding on gameplay elements that felt unique to the series as it continued to evolve. You may think that Volition closed the door on Saints Row as they transitioned and announced Agents of Mayhem. While this game is certainly not a Saints Row game, it feels like an evolution of it, and it does take place in the same universe, kinda. Agents of Mayhem is actually a spin-off of one of the endings in the Gat Out of Hell expansion, where fan-favorite character from Saints Row Johnny Gat asked God to recreate the Earth. In this new world, Agents of Mayhem are fighting an organization of supervillains called Legion. The gameplay is a continuation of what we saw in the Saints Row franchise, open-world, third-person action. The big difference between Agents of Mayhem and Saints Row, though, is that instead of creating a character and playing them for the entirety of the game, Volition has developed a cast of superheroes known as Mayhem. This group consists of a number of unique, colorful characters with different playstyles, weapons, and ways to upgrade them. In tone, Volition hasn't changed at all with Agents of Mayhem. If you love the outlandish fun and humor of the Saints Row series, you'll love Agents of Mayhem for the same reasons. The characters that comprise Mayhem are interesting enough in their own right. Each have their own backstory, side missions, and gameplay nuances. This is coupled with Volition's definitive style in their games, in terms of both the humor and gameplay elements from their previous efforts. A lot has been taken from the Saints Row series and incorporated here. It's an open-world game with all the collectibles, world events to tackle, and main story path missions that you'll be familiar with, but this time around, the sheer number of playable characters and ways to use them together as fighting units are the most obvious tweaks to that old formula. The Agents of Mayhem roll as a team, and whether on a mission or free-roaming soul, you can swap between any of the three characters that you put into a unit. Combat is third-person shooting, but each character may have strengths and weaknesses that must be used in tandem to take down different types of enemies. The roster of heroes in Agents of Mayhem feels almost like something you'd find in a MOBA. Each character has a unique primary weapon, and then 2 special moves that they can use to thin the ranks of Legion forces. With 12 unlockable agents and more, depending on if you pre-ordered from a certain retailer, there are certainly plenty of combinations to try. The game also lets you tackle any mission on a wide array of difficulty levels that scale bigger or smaller bonuses upon completion. This is definitely Agents of Mayhem's biggest strength, that and the daunting amount of collectibles and upgrades that you can find throughout the world to continue and strengthen Mayhem in their fight against Legion. Open world enthusiasts will find no shortage of things to do here, from tackling main path story missions to side missions that add color to each of the heroes' backstory. AOM does a great job in building this new world. For those coming from Saints Row, there are quite a few throwbacks to that game as well. References like the fast food restaurant Freckle Bitches and characters like Pierce and Gat being included in the game make it feel connected to that beloved series. It's unfortunate that they put Gat behind a pre-order scheme. For those that like the management aspect of things, there's plenty to do in Agents of Mayhem. Your home base, the Ark, has a number of things to do there when you're not out on missions. You can keep track of all your agency activities here. You can visit the requisition store and purchase upgrades for the agency. The Ark has a vehicle depot that you can build throughout the game, earning cars that have different bonuses and skins. There's an armory where most of your customization will take place. Each character can be outfitted with different gadgets in 3 slots, offering buffs and abilities. Upgrades and Legion tech can also be added to each character separately. Tech is developed in the R&D department. You'll need to find schematics and then use crafting materials to use these powerful upgrades for your characters. Agents of Mayhem is certainly a respectable third-person action game that's a lot of fun to play. The large roster of unique characters and multiple ways to customize and strengthen the agency definitely form a cohesive tone for the game in the fight against Legion. This progression corresponds with a story that feels and looks like a Saturday morning cartoon for adults, at least in the cutscenes that tell it. The game introduces you to over-the-top characters on both sides of the story. When you put all these things together, Agents of Mayhem feels like a step up from the Saints Row series in a lot of ways, but in others, it's not. That said, a lot of open-world games can get a little bit repetitive at times. In Agents of Mayhem's case, it does. It doesn't quite have the silliness and sandbox nature of Saints Row, where those games allowed you to cause chaos, and then it would often put you in ridiculous scenarios that had little to do with any mission or story element of the game. Agents of Mayhem just feels less dynamic than Saints Row did, especially in that regard. It feels more streamlined and mission-based than its predecessors. It also feels like a step backwards in some of the movement mechanics that Saints Row brought forward towards the end of that series. Bringing players back to a place where driving is the primary method of getting from point A to point B feels a little bit rote at this point. You'll spend quite a bit of time in vehicles in Agents of Mayhem. It's just not a fun mechanic when you go from the last game in the Saints Row series where players had the ability to bound through the world and soar through the skies and put them back in cars. This might be more of a nitpick for myself and less of a deal breaker for others. If you didn't mind the driving from the previous Saints Row games, you won't have any problem here. But know this, you will be following plenty of driving lines and will have a lot of checkpoint to checkpoint downtime. And while that's not a huge problem, what does feel like a bigger problem for Agents of Mayhem is the complete lack of online functionality in the game. There's no cooperative or competitive multiplayer, and it feels like an odd decision on both fronts. Even if they weren't going to do some sort of traditional PvP mode, they could have taken some inspiration from something like Ubisoft's Watch Dogs 2 to incorporate something else for players to do to mix up the monotonous gameplay. A cooperative mode seems like it should have been included at the very least. Some of the more challenging skill levels probably could have been incredibly fun to tackle with friends, and given the solid gameplay and three-person teams, could have rivaled something like Destiny or Borderlands. Agents of Mayhem feels like a game that doesn't reach its true potential. The high points are undoubtedly high, and that's commendable. The presentation, the characters, the gameplay, Agents of Mayhem feels like a great game in spots. It's got all the Saints Row style that you're accustomed to seeing from Volition, but it just lacks in features when compared to other open world games of this nature.